The Pokemon franchise has dominated handheld gaming for what feels like forever now. It's one of the few franchises that every time a new game gets announced, I get so excited because I can count on most things I like to stay the same and merely grow outwards. New monsters, new items, new moves, but with the same old battling system, same old world building, and same old aesthetic. So yeah, just go smack any of these games in your PSP, I mean, Virtual Boy, Atari Jaguar. Fuck! It's true that the games don't change up very much, but as sequels keep being made and money keeps falling into Satoshi Tajiri's pockets, something spiritual changes more and more. I love all these games to bits, and I don't want to miscommunicate this with what I say next, but there's a simple magic to the earliest games that we seldom see anymore amidst the multitude of quality of life improvements and side features. And in this video, we will look closely at Pokemon Red and Blue to see what made these early titles so very captivating. Just for a bit of context, I played through the entire game of Pokemon Blue only, without access to trading Pokemon with any other games in order to compile my notes. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Welcome to the world of Pokemon are the first iconic words that you'll read as you start up the game. Professor Oak introduces the player to the concept of the world you're about to enter. People live with magical animals called Pokemon that they catch, train, and battle. You name your character and Oak's grandson, who's your rival, and then you just go. You just go. You just go! You just go and fucking play a video game! No long character building sequence, no degenerate stats to assign, you just get going. This intro works great, it hits all the key bits of information before scuffering off so you can play a goddamn video game. The Gen 1 games are exceptionally well paced. Everything from the simple gameplay beats to the complexity to rounding out the Pokedex is delivered tightly and consistently. A lot of the time in games, including later entries in this very franchise, we see gameplay and story get in the way of one another's pacing. Usually it's either the gameplay having to take a break so that the player can receive a story beat, or the story takes too long to progress because the player is in control of the speed at which they get to the next plot point. We'll talk about the narrative a little later, so for now let's just focus on gameplay. The player is consistently given the tried and true pattern of dungeon, boss, contextually delivered as routes in caves or otherwise before a gym. Viridian Forest comes just before Brock, Mount Moon before Misty, the SS Anne before Surge, Rock Tunnel and Rocket HQ before Erica, Pokemon Tower before Koga, Silphco before Sabrina, both Seafoam Islands and Pokemon Mansion before Blaine, and, of course, Victory Road before the Pokemon League. You may have noticed that we're one gym short. Giovanni's gym is the only to lack this structure, and it's definitely felt. As a result, it was the only part of the game that felt rushed at all. Seriously, battling Blaine, then Giovanni, then your rival one after another is a bit of a nightmare and makes none of them stand out as memorable. This feels all the more alien due to how much consistency there is to the forward momentum of the rest of the game, though. Speaking of progression, players will come across several barricades throughout the game. These barricades are diegetically presented to the player outside of cinematics or any hand-holding. You find the Snorlax blocking the road, and it becomes a problem to solve. You get to Vermilion City, and you need to find out how to remove the small tree in front of the gym, and then find a way onto the SS Anne if you haven't visited Bill yet. On the other hand, you have the, tired old man, and the kid saying that you should challenge Brock, and they both lack context, and therefore suck balls! Why are these people here? How does this even stop you? They aren't authorities. If they were real people, you'd just say, yeah, right, you can't tell me what to do, and just keep going. The only reason that they're there at all is because the designers couldn't think of a better reason to stop you from going forward until you finish certain objectives. The rocket member in front of Sylph and the officer in Cerulean City are really close to being good, but they move out of their way for arbitrary reasons, so I'm going to give those a thumbs down too. But it's really important to note that most of the things blocking your forward momentum in the newer games are closer to the latter category, to the point where they even poke fun at their own failure to make convincing roadblocks with some truly fourth wall breaking instances. A lot of this feeling of agency regarding removing obstacles is lended to them rarely being introduced in scripted sequences. In X and Y, you're led right to the Snorlax to see that it's blocking the way. What? Game Freak, when you get to Vermilion or Celadon City, there's no call to action for either of their Snorlax problems. You were able to prove that you didn't need to hold the player's hand for this exact problem 20 years ago. Instead, you're like, welcome to town, let's take a look around and see what makes this city distinct. Maybe we'll check out the gym. Talk to the citizens. What's this over here? A big Pokemon sleeping blocking the road? Aw gee, I wonder what's on the other side. You see, in this scenario, rather than being given a destination, the player is given a goal that they are responsible to attain. And while the solution to this problem is not itself emergent, the desire to get past the obstacle is. And what's more, when the player comes across the key that's needed to move forward, it isn't explicit that this particular key is for that lock. When you finally receive the Pokeflute, you are told that it simply wakes up Pokemon. It's up to you to put 2 and 2 together. In this case, progression can only occur due to the curiosity and critical thinking of the player. Next, I'd like to talk about the namesake of the entire franchise and how well managed the acquisition of these little bastards is. Now, Pokemon is hardly the only game that allows the player to recruit or capture opponents and add them to their own party, but Pokemon aren't just capturable, they're also collectible. By that I mean that the Pokemon games have laid out a goal for you that is arguably more important than to challenge the league and become champion, and that is to become a Pokemon Master! In the more recent generations, it's actually really hard to complete the Pokédex, and not just because there's a ton of Pokemon now. In fact, Game Freak agrees. The standard practice now is to include a regional dex, with only a handful of the total Pokemon in existence, with its own reward for completion as a stepping stone to filling out the whole goddamn thing! What? There's 808 of them now? Jesus Christ, oh my— It's admirable to see developers make such a compromise to their original design in order to foster good gameplay, but Red, Blue, and Yellow go an extra mile in balancing evolution and obtainability around the progression of the game itself. You enter Route 1, and you have 2 possible choices for your first animal slave, Pidgey and Rattata, except hold it, no you don't, because you don't even have Pokeballs yet, because it's only your first time through here. Until you get Oak's parcel for him in Viridian City, you have time to fight against these novice-level monsters with extremely limited options, ensuring that you won't be overwhelmed. Compare this to X and Y, where the moment that you see the first patch of grass, you can catch up to 6 different species, all from different evolutionary lines, and by the time that you get to the next town, you can have 12? That's not even including your starter. This is a crazy overloading complexity by comparison, and while it has its benefits, I mean, options are nice after all. You can't possibly train all these monsters to full adulthood at once without having to make design concessions, like, I don't know, an experience share item maybe that gives your party infinite experience and completely tanks the difficulty of the game. So get this, if you take out every single stone-based and trade evolution in the entire game, there are only 7 Pokemon with a 3rd stage in the first generation. What's more, 3 of them are your starters, leaving only 5 possible lines in a single playthrough if no trades happen. The other 4 include Pidgeot, which you can get Pidgey on the first route, Beedrill and Butterfree, who hit their final stage at level 10, and Dragonite, whose existence I imagine is entirely based around being the hardest Pokemon to get to its final stage. Everything else in the game either has fewer stages than 3 or has a different requirement for hitting that last stage. Furthermore, after Dragonite, the highest level threshold to reach its final evolution is Rhydon at 42. And to top it all off, Game Freak is a company made of smart boys and girls. Let me explain. If you get a Caterpie in Viridian Forest and train it all the way through, you should have a Butterfree by the time that you hit Brock. And then, by the time you get to Cerulean City, it's probably not good anymore and you can make room for something else. The whole game is like this too. You can get a Meowth, a Cubone, and a Machop, and have a Persian, a Marowak, and a Machoke by the next gym if you just fight every trainer on the way. On my run through the game to gather my notes for this video, I had 97 different Pokemon by the time that I hit the credits, just playing naturally. That's nearly 2/3 of the entire Pokédex acquired without any grinding. That makes catching them all feel extremely intuitive. I really like this about these games. And it doesn't stop at collecting either. Having Pokemon hit their final stage quickly makes sure that nobody's a chore to catch up. Sure, Doduo is weak, but evolves into Dodrio super quickly after you catch it. Exeggutor and Cloyster are only an elemental stone's throw away. And then you hit the endgame, and you start finding these really tough single-stage Pokemon. Scyther, Tauros, Electabuzz, Magmar, Jinx, these guys exist to help you round out your team. They fill the holes that you couldn't naturally fill on the way and no longer have time to raise a Pokemon to meet those criteria for. Fresh to use right out of the box. This is an incredibly elegant solution to a very likely problem. Backing up a bit to the concept of evolutionary stones, so in every game you can take some rocks and throw them at your pet until they freak the fuck out and mutate. These are usually pretty rare, often given as gifts and to be used sparingly. In most cases, you would probably think, wow, I better use this item wisely and pick the right Pokemon to use it on. This is actually a really interesting decision to make, but the problem in modern Pokemon games is that you aren't heavily incentivized to catch every Pokemon due to the reasons I stated before. So you usually end up with only one guy in your team, if that needs a stone, so this is kind of a moot point. Gen 1, you can just buy them. Like, at the grocery store. And use them anytime. This trades the interesting choice of how you're going to use limited stones for when you should use them. Because, you see, in every Pokemon game, When you use a stone to evolve a monster, it stops learning moves through level up most of the time. That Pikachu isn't going to learn Thunder if you evolve it too soon. And yes, while it's true that this tradition would continue in later games, they have TMs to help you course correct. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Charles, that's a really stupid argument to make. There are TMs in Gen 1 as well, and you're absolutely right. But most of them are really bad. Like Teleport and Roar. Roar doesn't work in Gen 1. And they're also all single use in this generation, so the most important ones, like Earthquake and Ice Beam and Thunderbolt, are going to be a painful choice. So those moves that you would learn through level up, those are super valuable, and this suddenly becomes an interesting choice that ties into filling out the decks. Finally, there are some Pokemon that you can't get in a single playthrough or by yourself. In some cases, these are ones that you have to choose between, like the starters or the evolutions, or other times they are version exclusives. And finally, there are Pokemon that only evolve after being traded. I think some of these work better than others. For instance, making the player choose between certain Pokemon is good for the same reasons as mentioned before with the choices and the decisions and the meaningful impact on the gameplay decided by the player. It's good, it means that my game state is likely to be different from yours in yet another way. So are version exclusives, and while I'll admit that, for me, they didn't really achieve their goal to have kids become friends over a trade or a battle, I hear that the feature was really popular in Japan. It also makes canonical sense that in different cases you would have different species of Pokemon available, and the splits seem to be pretty evenly balanced throughout all the titles. I firmly believe that stellar pacing, both in Pokemon acquisition and story progression, coupled with gameplay driven by player choice, are the backbone of this game being so consistently good, and the success of the franchise owes a lot to these considerations. Before we move on, I want to mention legendary Pokemon. In this game, there are 5. 4 that you can get without a glitch or an external promotion. It is exactly this scarcity of legends and the fact that they are actually well hidden that makes them legendary. They aren't even relevant to the plot at all, they're just sitting there, indifferent to the happenings of the human world. Now, I'm not trying to say that there aren't advantages to incorporating these bad boys into a scripted narrative. You can tell a far more epic and storied adventure when villains seek to channel the power of gods and are stopped by children who are good, but at what cost? Xerneas is neither difficult to find nor to catch. You can't even miss encountering it, and mechanically speaking, it's fucking simple to add to your collection. I mean, it has to be. How lame would it be to be in the heat of a compelling story beat and fuck it up? That would be like missing a QuickTime event, then reversing time so that you can have another shot at it. Over, and over, and over. Nobody likes that, right? It's not that these are bad stories inherently, just that they go against the spirit of what you've been doing the entire game. Maybe if this were a linear game set in the Pokemon universe with characters who are their own characters, I would see the appeal more greatly. But the fact of the matter is that, up until this point, I've been playing a game where I have to work hard for each of my Pokemon, finding them, weakening them just the right amount, putting them to sleep to raise my chances of catching them with Pokeballs that I had to buy preemptively, then training them, customizing them so that they could become the most powerful that they could be, and here comes the narrative designer from Pokemon Sun and Moon to say, here's one of the most powerful monsters in the game, just have it. I won't pretend that I can speak for everyone, but personally, I never want to use the legendary Pokemon in these games because it just feels dirty. Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, and Mewtwo ooze stoicism and propel the power fantasy of being a badass trainer for it at light speed because you had to earn them. I will never forget what it was like when I caught Suicune in Pokemon Silver. I ran through the house screaming and pumping my fists in celebration because it was a genuine challenge that I overcame and was rewarded for. The story in the first generation games is simplicity at its finest. Ultimately, the motivation and narrative of these games are emergent. You're told 2 things as fact about this world. That there is a challenge to defeat all the gym leaders in the Elite Four, and that catching all the Pokemon species will make you a Pokemon Master. It's suggested to you to take the lead challenge, but the reason you want to do it isn't reactionary, it's because you want to be the very best, like no one ever was. A self-motivated protagonist is a powerful force in any story, but one whose motivations are your own is a trait unique to games, and it makes it easy to relate to them. You know exactly why he does the things he does. It's because you want to do it, and he's an avatar for you. To be fair, Pokemon usually gets this right. Their protagonists are typically devoid of personality in order to be self-inserts. When missteps do happen, they're usually external to the player. A kerfuffle happens, and your character is dragged along to solve it because the game won't let you have control until you finish this scripted sequence. It has nothing to do with what you as a player want to be doing, and everything to do with what the designers think you should want to do. In Saffron City you have to stop Team Rocket from taking over Sylph, but where other Pokemon games would explain why you need to do this right now because it's the most important and not do anything else first, and this is what you want to do. Aren't you having fun? You can just ignore it completely. Go to Cinnabar Island, defeat Blaine, travel to the Pokemon League, and find out that they won't let you in without the Saffron or Viridian gym badges. The reason you don't have either is because the secret 8th gym leader who turns out to be the Rocket boss Giovanni won't return to the Viridian City gym until you defeat him at Sylphco and have at least 7 other badges. But more importantly, you don't have the Marsh badge because Team Rocket are a bunch of silly doofs who are blocking the entrance to the Saffron City gym, and they won't move out of the way until you defeat them at Sylphco. I think a good litmus test for how good a mandatory plot point in an RPG is if you can motivate the player to go through with it regardless of where they fall on the D&D alignment chart.
Hey, you wanna stop Team Galactic?
No, not really. I'm just a child after all, and what they're doing has nothing to do with my goals of catching Pokemon and becoming the Sinnoh League champion, and I don't really believe in altruism.
Well, you can't progress until you do.
Is it because they're blocking the way to Sunnyshore's City for a reason that has to do with their agenda?
No, it's not even Team Galactic that stops you. There's a blackout in Sunnyshore's City, and it arbitrarily will be fixed and allow you to pass until you finish the Spear Pillar mission.
This is so divorced from the player's motivation that it's utterly baffling that this scenario made it into the final version of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Why do I have to rescue Bianca's Muna? Because the game assumes that I'm friends with this person and care. This would be acceptable if the protagonist was their own character, but they're just not. They're a stand-in for the player who has no reason to like Bianca other than that the fiction is clearly begging them to just roll with it. Team Rocket are completely understandable. The world in which the games take place is the exact same as ours except for that there are Pokemon which are valuable to people. It's absolutely natural to assume that the antagonists in these games would be Pokemon thieves. That's the big difference between this world and reality, and so that should be where the villains are unique as well. Why do they do it? Because Pokemon are powerful weapons and they're worth money. None of this is to say that environmentalism or a nihilistic worldview aren't perfectly good motivators for a villain, just that they require more explanation and would work better in games that were centered on characters like this. It's just so weird to go from saving the world from Groudon and thwarting Team Magma's evil plans to just go on and fight another gym and then beat the Pokemon League. Like, one of these scenarios is clearly more climactic than the other. Going even further, Generation 1 ties its villain plot with the main goals of our hero. Giovanni is the final gym leader and disbands Team Rocket after you best him in his own gym. This offers closure to both your journey as a gym battler and the twerp that gums up the plans of old Team Rocket. And while Team Rocket are great antagonists, they aren't even the main one. The first generation rival is the best that the series has ever had. He's rude, arrogant, and actually better than you. He beats every gym leader before you, even Giovanni. You can see his name on the statue at the entrance of every gym. Whenever you fight him, he's tough, often ahead of the curve, and he's even the final boss of the game. It's a surprise, too. You're told that if you beat the Elite Four, the strongest trainers in the land, you'll become champion. So you do, and it's revealed that you would be champion if the title hadn't just been claimed by that dick-face rival of yours. The only thing that I'd change about him, honestly, is that I would allow the player to be defeated by him and still progress the game state. This guy talks down to you the whole goddamn game, and while yes, he is a consistent challenge, you have to defeat him at every encounter to keep going. If he's so good, how come I beat him every time? I'd crank up his difficulty significantly so that the player feels utterly decimated when they lose to him. He talks smack, and he can back it up. You want to wipe that smug smile off his face, and in the end, you get to. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow had a vision, pillars that propped up every morsel of design that went into it. When adding to the story, the designers clearly asked, how does this reinforce the experience of becoming the strongest trainer? And when they added a mechanic, they asked, how does this add to the narrative of becoming a Pokemon master? They were consistent, relatable, and exceptionally well-paced. They, more than any other games in this saga, asked of you your curiosity and your sense of adventure. When I look at modern Pokemon games, I feel that, while it's not wholly gone, there's some of that wonder missing. Perhaps one day, Game Freak, that industry colossus, will look back to what they, as a small, imaginative Tokyo studio, knew so well and bring it forth into the modern era. Thanks so much for listening. This is the first of what I hope to be many videos of this type on my channel. If this video has interested you, please consider subscribing and following me on social media to see when new videos are coming out or what I'm up to. This project was the first big step for me in this type of production, and I'm hoping that as my skills increase over time, I'll be able to make them more quickly. For now, my most optimistic guess for when the next video will be coming out is within a month, and I'm prepared to be way off with that. I hope to see you there.